Hey, my name is Wyatt Brennan. I'm 35 years old, and I run a cattle ranch alone in the high country of Wyoming, about 40 minutes from the nearest town that has more than one stoplight. It's a hard, beautiful place. In the summer, the grass runs gold all the way to the mountains, and in the winter, the snow comes down like it means to bury you. And either way, there's more work than one man can finish in a day. I've been trying to finish it alone for 3 years now. I didn't used to be alone. My wife, Hannah, ran this ranch with me for 6 years. She was the better rancher of the two of us, if I'm honest about it. She could read a sky better than any forecast, could calm a spooked horse with just the sound of her voice, could work from dark to dark, and still have something left over to make the house feel like a home at the end of it. She was the warm center of this whole cold place, and I built my days around her without ever quite realizing that's what I was doing. She got sick in our 6th winter. It moved fast, the way the worst things always seem to. One month she was out in the cold, pulling a calf, and by the time the snow melted that spring, I was standing at a grave on the hill behind the house, trying to understand how the ranch that had always felt so full could suddenly be the emptiest place on earth. 3 years, and it still feels that way. I keep the place running because I don't know how to do anything else, and because letting it fall apart would feel like letting go of her, and I'm not ready to do that. But the house is quiet in a way that gets down into your bones and stays there. I eat standing up at the kitchen counter, because sitting at the table where we used to sit across from each other is worse than not sitting at all. Some weeks I forget the sound of my own voice, because there's no one out here to use it on. I tell you all this so you understand the kind of man I was on the afternoon she came walking up my road. Closed off, worn down. A man who had stopped expecting anything good to come up that long dirt drive and had made a kind of grim peace with that. It was late October, the first real cold of the season. The aspens already bare, and the wind carrying the smell of snow that hadn't fallen yet. I was mending fence along the front pasture when I saw her coming up the road on foot. That alone was strange. Nobody comes up my road on foot. The nearest anything is miles away, and the only people who turn down my drive are the feed delivery and the occasional lost tourist who realizes their mistake and turns right back around. She was maybe 30, with brown hair pulled back and a canvas duffel bag slung over one shoulder that looked like it held everything she owned in the world. Her boots were good but well worn, the boots of someone who actually worked in them, not someone playing dress-up at a dude ranch. She walked up steady and unafraid, and when she got close enough, she stopped a respectful distance away and looked me square in the eye, which most people don't do. "Are you the owner?" she asked. "I am." I set down my fencing pliers and straightened up. "Help you with something? I heard in town you run this place by yourself." She shifted the duffel on her shoulder. "I'm looking for work, ranch work. I can do all of it, feeding, fencing, calving, riding, whatever you've got. I don't need much. A place to sleep and enough to get me through the winter. I'll earn every bit of it." I looked at her for a long moment. I get the occasional drifter looking for a handout, and I've learned to spot them. But this wasn't that. She wasn't asking for charity. She was asking for work, and there was something in the set of her shoulders that told me she meant exactly what she said. "I can't afford a hand," I said, which was true enough. "Barely keep myself in the black out here. I'm not asking for much money. Room and board? Mostly. Whatever you decide the work was worth. After." She glanced past me at the fence line, at the sagging wire and the leaning posts I hadn't gotten around to. "And it looks to me like you've got more work than one man can do. I've been watching this place from the road for the last mile. Your east fence is down in 3 spots. Your barn roof's shy a good dozen shingles on the north side. Your stock tank float valve's stuck. I can see it running over from here. You're behind, and it's about to snow, and once it does, you'll be twice as behind." She wasn't wrong about any of it. She'd read the whole ranch in a mile of walking. Seen things I'd been meaning to get to for weeks, the way only someone who'd truly lived this life could. Despite myself, despite 3 years of wanting nothing but to be left alone, I was impressed. "What's your name?" I asked. "Cora." She didn't offer a last name, and something in the way she stopped after the first one told me not to push for it. "Where'd you learn to ranch, Cora?" Something flickered across her face. Quick, there and gone, like a cloud shadow crossing a field. "Grew up on one," she said. "Long time ago. Different life." She said it in a way that closed the door on the subject, firm but not unkind. And I recognize that tone because I use it myself when people in town ask about Hannah. It's the tone of a person guarding a wound. I should have said no. Everything sensible in me said no. A stranger with no last name and a duffel bag and a past she wouldn't talk about. Showing up on foot asking to live on my property through a mountain winter. Every instinct I had for self-preservation said send her back down the road while there's still daylight to walk it in. But the wind was carrying snow that hadn't fallen yet, and my fence was down in 3 spots, and there was something in her eyes. Not desperation exactly, but a kind of steadiness that had clearly been hard-won, the look of someone who had survived something and come out the far side of it, still standing on her own 2 feet. And God help me, after 3 years I was so tired of the quiet. "There's a bunkhouse," I heard myself say before I'd fully decided to say it. "Hasn't been used in years. It's got a wood stove and a cot and a roof that mostly keeps the weather out. It's not much." "It's more than I've got right now," she said simply. "Trial basis, 2 weeks. You pull your weight, we'll talk about the winter. You don't, you're back down the road, no hard feelings. Fair?" For the first time since she'd walked up, something in her face eased, just slightly. "Fair," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan." "Wyatt," I said. "Just Wyatt. The Mr. Brennan was my father. That was how it started. I'll tell you right now." She pulled her weight and then some. That first 2 weeks, she worked harder than any hand I'd ever hired in the good years when I could afford them. She was up before I was, which I genuinely hadn't thought was possible. She fixed the east fence in 2 days flat, then reshingled the whole north face of the barn roof without my even asking her to, just because she'd seen it needed doing. She could throw a rope, drive a post, back a loaded trailer down the narrow lane without clipping a thing, and doctor a sick calf with a gentleness that made the animals settle under her hands. Whatever she'd meant by different life, she'd learned this work down to the marrow. The kind of knowledge you cannot fake and cannot learn from a book or a video. It only comes from years, but it was more than the work. It was that the whole ranch started to feel different with her on it. Small things at first. The bunkhouse window glowing warm and gold in the evening when I'd grown so used to looking out at nothing but dark. The sound of another person's boots crunching on the frozen ground in the gray of morning. Coming in stiff and cold from the far pasture to find she'd left a pot of coffee on the stove because she'd seen my truck coming up the drive and figured I'd want it. We didn't talk much those first weeks. We were 2 people who had each learned, in our own ways, to live comfortably inside our own silences. But you cannot work alongside someone from dawn to dark, day after day, without something beginning to thaw between you whether you mean it to or not. It came slow, a few words traded over a fence line, a grunt of shared effort hauling a bale, then one cold evening, a shared meal at the end of a long day. Her sitting at one side of the kitchen table I hadn't been able to bring myself to sit at in 3 years. Me across from her, both of us a little surprised to be there. I noticed things about her the way you do. She was funny, in a dry, quiet way you had to be paying attention to catch. The kind of woman who'd say something devastating with a perfectly straight face and let you find it a beat later. She noticed things too. She caught me looking, more than once, at Hannah's old rocking chair by the window, the one I still couldn't make myself move after 3 years. And instead of asking about it, instead of prying, she'd just quietly change the subject and give me somewhere else to put my eyes. It was a small kindness, but I felt it every time. She had a gentleness running underneath all that toughness that reminded me, in a way that ached low in my chest, of what it had been like to simply not be alone in a house. But I noticed the other things too, the things she guarded. There was the afternoon we were moving stock down near the creek that runs along the bottom of the east pasture. It's a small creek most of the year, shallow, harmless, but the fall rains had it running higher and faster than usual, brown and loud over the rocks. I watched Cora, who could do anything with any animal, who feared nothing on four legs, stop dead at the edge of that water. Just for a second. Her whole body went rigid, and something crossed her face that I had no name for, something close to terror, before she mastered it and pushed through. She got the cattle across, but she went the long way around the deepest part, and she didn't look at the water while she did it. "You all right?" I asked her after. "Fine," she said too quickly. "Just don't much care for fast water, never have." And she changed the subject. I let it go. Lord knows I had my own subjects I didn't want turned over, but I filed it away the way you do. There was another night, a few weeks in, when a hard rain came through and hammered the tin roof of the barn while we were finishing up the evening feeding. It wasn't a bad storm, just loud. But I saw Cora flinch at the sound of it, saw her go still and watchful, saw her hands tighten on the pitchfork she was holding, and it took her a minute of standing very quiet to come back to herself. I pretended not to see, but I saw she was carrying something. That much was plain. She'd flinch sometimes at a sudden movement or a raised voice, quick and controlled, gone in an instant, but I saw it every time because I'd learned to watch for the things people try to hide. And there were nights I'd wake in the small hours and see the bunkhouse light still burning, and I knew she wasn't sleeping any better than I was. We were two people carrying weights we couldn't set down, working the same cold land, orbiting each other like a pair of tired planets, each of us sensing the other's burden and neither of us daring to ask about it. The 2 weeks became the winter, without either of us ever making a formal thing of it. One evening in mid-November I just said, over supper, "Guess you're staying on." Then, and she looked up from her plate and said, "Guess I am," and that was the entire negotiation. But I noticed I slept a little easier that night, knowing the bunkhouse light would be there in the morning. The snow came in earnest in December, and the world closed down to the boundaries of the ranch the way it does up here. When the passes fill in, you're on your own, you and whoever's snowed in with you. And in that closed-down white world, something kept growing between us that I didn't have a name for and was, frankly, half afraid to name. It was the small things that undid me, the way she hummed under her breath while she worked, not even aware she was doing it, the way she'd save the runt of a task for herself and hand me the easy part without making a thing of it, the way she'd started at some point to laugh at my few bad jokes, really laugh, and how much I found I lived for the sound of it in all that snow-muffled quiet. One night, watching her across the table by the light of the fire, the flames warm on her face, I felt something turn over in my chest that I hadn't felt in 3 years, and it frightened me so badly that I got up and went to bed without a word and lay awake half the night, feeling like I was betraying a woman asleep under the snow on the hill behind the house. But Hannah, wherever she'd gone, would have had no patience with that kind of thinking. She'd have told me, in that plain way she had, that a heart isn't a finite thing, that there's no fixed amount of love in a person that runs out once it's spent, that loving someone new doesn't subtract from someone lost. I knew all that in my head. It just took my chest a good while longer to believe it. It was deep in January when I finally learned who Cora really was. There'd been a blizzard, a bad one, 2 full days of whiteout, where you couldn't see the barn from the kitchen window. On the second night the power went out, the way it always does eventually in a storm like that. The bunkhouse stove wasn't going to be enough against that kind of cold, not safely. So I brought her into the main house, and we sat up together by the wood stove in the front room, waiting out the worst of it, the wind screaming against the windows like something alive that wanted in. There's a thing that happens in a storm like that. The way it seals you off from the entire rest of the world, cuts every line back to civilization, leaves just the two of you and the fire and the dark. It loosens something, makes it possible to say things out loud that you could never say in ordinary weather. She was quiet a long time, watching the flames. Then she said, without looking at me, "You ever wonder why I came here? Out of everywhere in this whole state I could have gone? Figured you needed the work, and I had it," I said. "I could have found work anywhere. Every ranch in this part of the country's short a hand." She kept her eyes on the fire. "I came here on purpose, Wyatt. I came looking for you, specifically you." I went very still. "What do you mean? Looking for me?" She turned to face me then, and there were tears standing in her eyes, but her voice held steady. The particular steadiness of someone who has rehearsed a thing 10,000 times alone in the dark and is finally, at last, saying it out loud to another living soul. 15 years ago, she said, I was a girl, 17 years old. My family had a ranch 2 counties over from where you grew up, before everything fell apart for us. That spring there was a flood, the worst anybody in that country had ever seen. The river jumped its banks in the night. I was out at dawn trying to move stock to high ground, alone, because my father was hurt, and there was no one else, and my horse went down, crossing what was usually a shallow ford, and the water took me right off him and under. Her hands were shaking now, though her voice somehow didn't, and all at once I understood the creek. The fast brown water she wouldn't look at, the way she went the long way around. I went under, she said. I remember it. I remember the cold like a set of teeth closing on me, and the brown water over my head, and thinking, very clearly, this is it. This is how it happens. This is where I die. And then something had me. Somebody had me. A boy, couldn't have been much older than I was, had come off the bank into that flood after me, a stranger, someone who had no earthly reason to, and he got a fist in my collar, and he fought that current and hauled me half a mile downstream onto a gravel bar, and he pounded the water out of my lungs until I coughed and breathed and came back to the world. The fire popped in the stove. The wind howled against the glass. I could not move. I could not speak. I was half drowned and out of my head, she said. I never even got his name. By the time I could think straight, there were other people, my father's men, chaos everywhere, and someone carried me off, and when I looked back for him, he was already gone. My family lost the ranch that same year. The flood finished what the debts had started, and we moved away, and I never found him. But I never forgot him either. 15 years. I never once forgot the boy who went into a flood after a girl he'd never laid eyes on, pulled her out, brought her back to life, and then didn't even stay long enough to be thanked. Who did the biggest thing anyone ever did for me and just let it go, asked for nothing? She looked at me then, full on, and the tears finally spilled over and ran down her face. It took me years to find you, she said. I only ever had pieces, the county it happened in, a description that got vaguer every year in my memory. A first name one of my father's old hands thought he remembered, Wyatt. That was all. I'd just about given up, told myself it was a fool's errand, a childhood ghost. And then last year I heard a man in a feed store talking about a rancher up in this high country, widowed young, working a big place all alone, name of Wyatt Brennan. Her voice finally broke, and something in me just knew. You pulled me out of that river. You saved my life 15 years ago, and you never even knew my name. I came all this way to find the man who did that. I came to say thank you to your face, before I lost the chance forever. I sat there with the whole white world roaring outside the windows, and I remembered. I'd been 18. I remembered that flood. Everyone who lived through it remembered that flood. I remembered standing on a bank, swollen brown and violent, and seeing a horse go down in the current, and a girl going under with it. And I remembered not thinking, not for 1/2 of 1 second, just going in, the cold like a physical blow, the water trying to take me too, and getting a hand in her collar and fighting for the both of us, and dragging her out onto a gravel bar and pounding on her back until she brought up half the river and started breathing again. I remembered the other people coming, and someone lifting her away from me, and standing there soaked to the bone and shaking, watching a truck carry her off, and never once finding out if the girl I'd pulled from the water had truly lived. I'd wondered about her for 15 years, too, whether she'd made it, whether she'd gone on to have a whole life, a real one, the years I'd maybe helped hand back to her. I had never, in all that time, known. "That was you," I said. My voice came out cracked down the middle. "The girl in the flood. All this time, that was you." She nodded, crying and laughing both at once, the way people do when a thing is simply too big to hold any other way. "That was me. You gave me every single year I've had since. Every one. And I spent 15 of them wanting to find you just so I could tell you. The girl you pulled out of that river, she grew up. She's all right. She made it, Wyatt. Because of you. I don't mind telling you that I wept." A grown man, 35 years old, who had not cried once since the day he buried his wife, sitting by a wood stove in the middle of a blizzard with his face in his hands, weeping. Because for 3 long years I had believed, all the way down, that I was a man good things had simply stopped happening to. That my share was spent, buried on the hill out back, and here, sitting across from me in the firelight, was living proof otherwise. Proof that a good thing I'd done as a boy, and let go of, and never seen the end of, had gone out into the world and grown quietly into an entire human life. And then that life had walked back up my road on a cold October afternoon, with a duffel bag on her shoulder, and asked if she could work through the winter. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked when I could talk again. That first day. Why the ranch hand? Why all these months? Why not just say who you were? She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. "Because I didn't want it to be about the debt," she said. "I didn't want to walk up to a stranger's door and say, 'You saved my life once, so now you owe me a place to belong.' That's not love, and it's not gratitude. That's just guilt, and guilt's a poison to build anything on." She looked down at her work-ruined hands. "I wanted to know the man you actually were, first. 15 years I'd built you up in my head into something more than human, and I needed to meet the real person, and I needed to earn my place here honestly, as myself, as Cora, as a hand who could do the work, and not as some half-drowned girl you barely remembered. And then," she stopped. "And then?" I said. "And then I didn't count on this." She said it very quietly, and she gestured between us, at the fire, at the table I could finally sit at again, at whatever it was that had been growing all winter long, that neither of us had ever quite dared to say out loud. "I came here to thank a stranger and then say goodbye and go. That was the whole plan. I didn't count on not wanting to leave. I didn't count on you." The wind screamed against the house, the fire burned low in the stove, and sitting there, I understood at last that I had been wrong about my own life. I decided the good part of it was finished, buried on the hill behind the house with Hannah. But that wasn't true, and it never had been. The good I'd put into the world hadn't ended. It had just been out there for 15 years, growing, living, waiting, and it had finally found its way home in the shape of a woman who worked harder than any hand I'd ever hired and had, without my noticing exactly when, made this cold old ranch feel like a place worth living on again. "Then don't," I said. She looked up. "Don't what?" "Don't leave." My voice was steadier now. "You said you came here to say thank you and then goodbye. All right, say the thank you if you need to. I heard it. I'll carry it the rest of my life. But skip the goodbye." I reached across the space between our chairs and took her hand, rough and strong from a winter of hard work, the very same hand I'd apparently once dragged out of a flooded river without ever learning her name. "Stay, Cora. Not because you owe me a thing. You don't. Not because I owe you. Just stay because this cold house has felt like a home again for the first time in 3 years, and I'm not fool enough to let that walk back down the road. I don't want to lose it. I don't want to lose you." She turned her hand over inside mine and held on. And she didn't say anything at all, but she didn't need to. She just moved from her chair to sit beside me and put her head on my shoulder. And we stayed there by the fire while the blizzard spent the last of its fury against the walls. Two people who had both, in one way or another, been pulled out of deep water, finally back together on solid, quiet ground. The snow melted that spring, the way it always does, no matter how hard the winter. We were married that summer, out in the front pasture where she'd first come walking up my road, under a wide blue sky she could read better than any forecast, the mountains standing gold and green behind us. She runs this ranch with me now, the way Hannah once did, though the two of them were nothing alike. And I've long since stopped trying to hold one up against the other. Because Cora was right, that night by the fire. A heart isn't a finite thing. There's room in one life for the love you lost and the love you found, and honoring the one doesn't cheat the other. I still walk up the hill behind the house sometimes to sit a while, and I don't feel like I'm betraying anyone anymore when I do. I think Hannah would have liked her, in the end. I think she'd have been glad the place got warm again, glad I wasn't rattling around out here alone. People in town know the whole story now. The widowed rancher and the ranch hand who turned out to be the girl he'd pulled from a flooded river when they were both little more than children, 15 years before either one of them knew the other's name. They tell it around here like it's a fairy tale, like fate itself reached down out of the sky and arranged every piece of it. But I don't believe it was fate, exactly. I've thought about it a lot, and here's what I've come to. I think a boy went into a river one spring morning because in that moment he simply couldn't do anything else, and he saved a life, and then he let it go without ever asking for a single thing in return. And I've come to believe that a thing like that doesn't just vanish once it's done. It goes out into the world, and it grows, quietly, invisibly, for years and years inside a life you will never see and never know. And every so often, if you are very lucky, and if you've kept your door open even a crack, it comes walking back up your road one cold afternoon, sets its duffel bag down on your porch, and asks if it might stay for the winter. I said yes to a stranger that October day. Said it almost against my own better judgment. Turned out I was saying yes to the best years of my whole life.